Did you know for branded residences, the biggest unresolved question is sales and marketing? Going on to that, I think something that we understand with branded residences, it's a fragmented space from country to country. It's much different than hotels. Branded residences for hospitality is very important. If you look at globally, brands like Four Seasons, 60% of their pipeline or new projects have branded residences or are mixed use. So more and more we're seeing the large hospitality groups who are listed companies who need to drive revenue. They're looking for other sources of revenue, and branded residences is becoming a business line for these groups as well. So when you're looking at sales and marketing, what's different is that they rely on developers. It's not a hotel where you have plug and play and you have the whole playbook, which is pre-opening and everything else, because every market is different when it comes to real estate. And that's an interesting part about that side of the business. When you combine real estate and you combine hotels, it's very much, you're looking for equilibrium. It's imperfect. And I think that's really something which is, developers are finding challenging, but also there's a gap in the market. You go anywhere from food, you look at Nobu, certainly what's fueling Nobu's growth, as a hotel group as well. You're seeing branded real estate into the market as well. Car brands, you see everything going from Mercedes onto Porsche. If you go to the Porsche branded residences in Bangkok, that's a landmark project where you saw, they basically doubled the luxury real estate market, saying the pricing, which was about 600,000 per square meter, going all the way up to 1.2 million per square meter, for Porsche branded residences as well. So you're seeing the car, anything with a brand. We've even seen Swarovski, in terms of the crystal company getting involved, licensing deals. I think that's something we saw post-COVID, and that's something which is consistent with the hospitality space, because hospitality now, you've seen the deals which Accor made in Vietnam, with Accor is making the same deal with boutique third-party operators, TPOs, and they're saying we would prefer to be a licensing entity. We shed a lot of cost to operate hotels, but we want to be licensing, our brand. So brand licensing certainly is a lot easier, and it really focuses on a couple things: brand value, brand premiums, and also really looking at distribution and providing that distribution model as well. It gives them scale. But there has been a big shift in the hospitality space, certainly with branding, which extends to branded residences after COVID. You're continuing to see this space expand, and I think something that's interesting is there's soaring land cost and soaring construction cost. And when you have that, that's like a perfect storm, because how can you underwrite a hotel only? It's so difficult. You have cost which is rising at hyperinflation figures. So if we go to Bali, if we go to Japan, it's almost impossible to underwrite a new hotel because land costs are so high and construction costs. So you need to bring real estate element into it. But you also, again, it goes back to equilibrium and finding what's working. Because for a branded residence to work properly too, if you have a co-located hotel, it's important that, again, there's different models for branded residence, but you have a co-located hotel, that hotel has to function also. So you've got to find something, again, which is going to have a balance, because at the end of the day, when you're doing a hotel, the highest yielding units are your entry-level units. They're yielding. When you come to real estate, you're having larger units, more expensive units, but you have some owners who also want to have that service edge as well. Perhaps they want to be rented through the hotel as well. So again, you're trying to find the space and balance those two. We're seeing a lot of more branded residences. If I go in, within, say, the Bangtao area, we call it the Bangtao effect. And you have a lot of projects here and there, coming up, you have a lot of branded residences. You've seen groups like AssetWise, which is Rombo property, doing things like the title, but they're also putting hotels. So the people executing new hotels, you've got a hotel, actually today we're at the Slate in Nanyang, and we're looking at, just near here, there's an Indigo coming up. That's part of a mixed use development. The owner is saying, the developer is saying, let's also build some residential, let's build branded residential, but let's have a hotel as well. If you extend it to Bangtao, same thing. You've got the Autograph Collection by Marriott coming up. You have a Staybridge, which is part of a mixed-use project. You've got a Voco, which is part of a mixed-use project. So again, it goes backwards to developers saying, yeah, let's have hospitality. The hospitality gives it a sense of place. It gives it a brand, which is important for a destination as well. So I think there's a lot more. And what we're seeing now is what we call the Saracen shift. Because for luxury in Phuket, the problem about luxury is right now there's not a large number of new significant luxury projects coming on the island. And to me, that's a real challenge for Phuket, because at the end of the day, if you're picking up Condé Nast hot list, what projects are you reading about? You need luxury. And if we go back to Phuket, we look at the traditional luxury, it's this, not this. And you say, what the hell is that? That really is when we're seeing Trisara, we're seeing Amanpuri, we're seeing Sri Panwa. These are projects which are not necessarily beachfront, but they're located on hills, and they have aspect, they have privacy, they have that kind of exclusive ambience as well. There's not many sites like that Phuket, so when we go across, we're looking at projects coming in Natai. You see projects also coming in Koh Yao Noi, where we see branded properties come up, but also luxury projects. So we see a shift, certainly, in terms of luxury going over the bridge. There's 2 new big luxury projects which are branded by major hotel groups, which are upcoming, which are unannounced. Going into Khao Lak now, you've got the Matalay project, which has 5 hotel sites which are beachfront. Now in Phuket, it's unheard of to get a beachfront hotel site. And so again, we're seeing that shift, crossing over the bridge, crossing into the bay as well, and looking for new things. But for Phuket, we really need to see new luxury elements come into the marketplace as well to be a leading destination. Infrastructure is, again, you've got the private sector, which is running. You've got the government, which is far behind. It's not any different than in Bali. It's not any different than most destinations right now. It's a problem. We have to look at the truth of that, and it's going to favor locations which are, have proximity to the airport, which have proximity to travel time as well. In the long run, we're not seeing much. A few years back, who is going to execute these projects? We talk about the Andaman Airport, and who's going to be financing this? So we're not seeing these public-private partnerships yet execute. I think that's a large thing. So that the government's making noises about FDI, but who's going to be bringing in infrastructure? And I guess probably our biggest threat is Vietnam. Vietnam, when you go to Vietnam now, look in Phu Quoc, which again, Vietnam's interesting because as a direct competitor to places like Phuket, it has similar weather. When you go further up the coast, you're going to Nha Trang, you're going into Con Dao, you're going into Da Nang. Those are much colder climates. But for the snowbird customer who comes in from Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, they want that weather from November all the way through March. And Phu Quoc has that weather pattern. But the size of the infrastructure coming up, the new international airport is the size of Suvarnabhumi going into Phu Quoc, which Phu Quoc is a smaller accommodation market than Phuket. So again, the Vietnamese are, it's kind of a China story. I go back to how China was in the 80s, 90s, going into the early 2000s. You had infrastructure. The government was able to acquire land. They were able to execute mega projects and infrastructure. So I think that's something which is lagging, certainly. And Thailand's going to have to get their act together to stay competitive. If we go to Indonesia, we see where toll roads are coming in, and we see the big developers do these kinds of things. And in Thailand, you would have to underwrite the land development laws. So that starts with it. I mean, one thing which is interesting, we're all seeing the volatility in the marketplace right now, talking about nominees, talking about other things. This is the first time in a long time we've seen interagency cooperation, where you're seeing Department of Department of the Interior working with the Revenue Department, working with the Land Department, and we're starting to see more documentation and more transparency online, and that's one step. But the other step is that you would have to amend the land laws of Land Development Act and say these are the restrictions. That has to get done. But that's the starting point. You can't blame necessarily the developers because they're working with what they have. But the government really needs to change those land development laws and say we need these projects to be funding local infrastructure. Absolutely.
What's hot and what's burnt out for investors?
That's a good thing. I think we've been working in about 12 countries this year. Japan continues to be hot, but Japan, the cost of development is just soaring. Construction costs are soaring. It was interesting how Japan has gone, and there's a problem with the China issue, and everybody said, "Oh, Japan's going to fall over." But now all of a sudden they've replaced that market. The Chinese are coming back, but they've replaced it with other countries as well. You have a floating yen, which made it more attractive, but tourism is right on to regain their numbers in Japan. So Japan continues to be hot. Certainly going abroad, and we see other countries. Vietnam continues to be hot because of pricing. And I think to a point when you see we look at the Philippines. The Philippines is struggling, and which is such an amazing tourism country, all the potential in the world, but they've lost their Korean market. And it goes backwards to airlift, it goes back to price. And there's also a thing about, when you have a certain cycle and people go to places like Bohol, they go to Cebu, and they've been there, and then what do they do next? there's not enough new destinations to inspire that. The visa regime is not that easy, in countries like that. So I think countries like certainly struggling, Philippines, Cambodia continues to struggle. These markets, again, we're seeing a little glimpses of hope in terms of other markets like Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka still has interest in the southern part of the island, in terms of the south coast, in those areas as well. Also, Nuri Ella as well, these locations with this kind of tourism. But overall, I think, when we look at places like Thailand going into the rest of this year, the numbers are still going to be okay in terms of the hotel revenue, in terms of rates are staying high, but there's trouble knocking at the door in terms of where room rates are going. You can't keep increasing your rates and losing market share to places like Vietnam as well. Bali continues to be an interesting market as well. It continues to be propelled. Everybody's trying to get in on the Indian markets. We're seeing a rising Middle East traveler. All you do is have to go around Phuket right now and see how many Middle Easterns are coming in. It's so hot, July, August, these months as well. So these markets are emerging. But I think certainly it's going to be a challenging marketplace the rest of this year. A lot of volatility over shrinking airlift. And we always say with airlift, you can't stay there if you can't get there. I think Patong has been hit hard. As we're sitting in Phuket today, we're seeing Patong. Bangkok has been hit hard. Certainly, when you look at Sukhumvit, you look at the Soys, the three-star hotels are hurt because you're not having mass tourism. I think they're the biggest issue right now. Until you bring back the numbers, they're not going to regenerate business because basically you're just rate warring. And when you have box hotels, which aren't resorts or don't have any DNA, you're simply being a commodity. So the type of product which is commoditized, that's been the one being hit hard. I think you have to look at the opportunity. You have to evaluate every opportunity and see how you can add value. We always go back, if you're dealing with private equity, they say, how can we add value? Should we acquire something and reposition it? If we're going to do greenfield, I think too often people ignore that greenfield sometimes is easier, to actually start with a clean slate and actually do a new project and get through with BOI ownership and everything else. And you take a long-term view. Hotel ownership and hotel development is a long-term. But it also favors developers who are brave. I look at, today we're sitting in the slate again. We took it back, Kunwichit and the team were brave in what they did with this hotel by creating something really unique. And developers have to do that. Hotel companies operate hotels quite efficiently, but developers are the ones to create great properties and memorable properties at the end of the day. So our recommendation is have a vision and be true to that vision.